And I think we are good to go. So welcome everyone. If you are live streaming with us on Facebook or on Zoom, thank you for being here. My name is Alex Murphy. I'm the political director for the Yes on 2 for Better Elections campaign, and really excited to be joined by these two authors. We've got Heather Lende and David Daley with us today to just talk about politics, local politics, national politics, the situation that we find ourselves in, and just have a great conversation about their experiences. David Daley, just to give a little intro, is a senior fellow for Fair Vote and author of multiple books, one of which I'm not sure how to say the title on this Zoom. I'll leave that to you, Dave. But the book that we're talking about today is called Unrigged: How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy. He's done a lot of research on gerrymandering and political reforms and citizens initiatives across the country. So really excited to have you share your experience, David. And also joined by Heather Lende, who, if you are from Southeast Alaska, you definitely know her name. She's the author of Bears and Ballots and a number of other books. And Heather, I know your work has been distributed pretty widely across Alaska and nationally. And so we're just excited to have you join us and talk a little bit about each of your experiences. So I'm going to pass it off to you two to have a conversation, and then you know, if you're watching on Zoom, if you're watching on Facebook, if you'd like to ask any questions of these two, go ahead and type them into the chat box. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, and we'll talk a little bit more about Ballot Measure 2 and the reforms that we're working on here in Alaska. But without further ado, I'm gonna pass it off, and thanks for joining us.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody who is joining us. It's really exciting to be out in Alaska, speaking to you all from the beauty of my living room here in Massachusetts, many, many miles away, where we are also having an initiative on ranked choice voting this year. So Massachusetts and Alaska have that in common, and in fact it's Yes on 2 in both places, so easy for us all to keep in mind. Great to be joined by Heather, and this is going to be a lot of fun. Heather, when folks talk about your book, Bears and Ballots, this is one of the lines that's been written about it. Heather's fights and conflagrations as a member of the Haines, Alaska Borough Assembly are a perfect reflection of our national politics and give us a good reason for hope. People are selfish and unreasonable and pushy and frightened and stupid. They come to the meetings, and they always have. And with the help of the few souls we elect to sit at the front of the room and take the heat, we work things out and the world rolls on. Tell us why your experience in Haines seems to resonate so strongly with folks who have never even been to Haines, never even been to Alaska.
Well, I think it's because, first of all, we're a very isolated, but we're also a very politically active little town. And we've always been about a 50-50 split, you know, of left or right. It's not really political parties. I know that we're talking about party politics today, but it seems to fall typically in Alaska much more on the lines of development, you know, versus the environment. A lot of it has to do with resource development of all kinds, and that then what's happened, I think, in the time that I was on the assembly from 2016. Of course, the election of 2016 changed everything, and for the 3 years till 2019, it seemed that at first I thought, well, maybe Haines has filtered up to the national level, but it seemed like a lot of it filtered down. And I'm thinking, like, there was a meeting that we went to where the local Park and Rec Commission wanted to draw a map of recreational uses in the Chilkat Valley, you know, so ski trails, snow machine trails, bike trails, hiking trails, just to get a feel of the places, basically public land that people are using, to just sort of help better manage it, or even just let people know where to go who are new in town or tourists or whatever. This might be a nice place for you to do such and such an activity. And normally, you know, that would be a sort of a friendly discussion about different user groups. We've gotten along for years. There hasn't really been any conflicts between skiers and snow machiners, say, or things like that. And then what happened at that meeting was typical, sort of like a national politics. It went out on a local closed Facebook page that, you know, basically all the skiers were going to take away the snow machines, and they were going to make sure nobody could ever snow machine in the valley again. And not only that, it was going to be your trucks and your four-wheelers and your airplanes and your boats. And I mean, there was like, the library was packed. The Port Park and Rec Committee, they're used to like one person at their meetings, suddenly had all these people there. And even one man even stood up and said, it was, I think it was February or March, whatever Black History Month is. And he said, it's so ironic that this is Black History Month, because now I feel like Rosa Parks, because you're telling me that I can't, you know, take my snow machine or my airplane, or this man also happened to have like a 54-foot commercial fishing boat, you know, out. And it was like, really, like, how did this in Haines get to that? And to me, that comes right through sort of the internet and groups organizing, and that hasn't really been so much the case in Haines before. And that was very kind of frustrating and scary. And it's the same thing that we're seeing even in the local election. You know, people are talking about the Second Amendment. I mean, people in Haines have rifles or guns. They were hunters. That's never been a big issue in town at all. But suddenly it's, if you're a Democrat or you're liberal, you're trying to take that away. And I'm a liberal person and we hunt. and so and those seem to be coming from a national perspective and not from a local one. So I think there's that. I think in terms though of the hopefulness of it, because we are small and because we're all dependent on each other, we had to get along. You know, there's a lot of humility. You kind of have to suck it up. You get yelled at by somebody and they say something terrible based on what they think your political affiliation is, but then you still have to sit down with them at the next meeting because they're on a committee to determine where you're going to put an outhouse at Mosquito Lake and who's going to maintain it. And you actually agree that, you know, we can't make it too expensive and we can't have this fancy system because, and even though you might be this far apart on a political divide, when there's a specific problem, you agree and you have to get stuff done and you have to get the streets plowed and you have to make sure, you know, the library is open or the fire truck runs, and all of those things that happen on a local level have absolutely nothing to do with party politics. And so I think that shows some hopefulness to me.
There should be some things like that we can all agree on, right? Keeping the cost of local projects down and having them work the way everybody wants them to, getting streets plowed. I guess I wonder, how do you think we got to the place where, even though we have all of these things in common at a local level, sometimes these national polarized fights can seem so overwhelming and sort of get in the way? I mean, there's a recall effort that gets underway in Haines, and friends for years are sort of caught in the middle, and suddenly we're polarized and unfriending people, and off we go.
You know, I've actually, you kind of answered that in your first book in some ways. I think there's a sense that, and in your, you know, it's rigged, that it's unfair. And that's on both the left and the right are feeling very threatened, because it seems that what's happened is, and even in Haines and now nationally, you know, where, what did E.B. White say about politics? It's the suspicion that, you know, a little more than half of the people are right a little more than half of the time. And when you have so many people who are not happy and just a little sliver happy, you almost get and then when that sliver though decides to just simply basically dismantle everything that the other side values, and even things that you thought they valued, like in Alaska, you know, the university system, the Alaska Marine Highway. I mean, these are not left-right things, and So people get scared. So then what happens is the people that you identify with, whether it's a party or this group or that group, you don't budge at all because they're going to take everything. They're taking everything that you care about. And so I think on both sides, people are afraid and they don't trust the system and they think it's rigged. And that creates, you know, and I've even been guilty of it when I've looked at a ballot and I thought, well, I don't really like that person. I don't think that's the best person. I actually think he is, but you know, that one is with that group and this one is with my group. So I'm just gonna have to vote for her anyway, even though she wouldn't be the person I'd vote for because I'm so afraid that that other person will tip the other group and they'll just go like that with the checkers, you know, and throw them all on the floor. So that's the environment that we found ourselves in. And I think that's, you know, that needs to change. And there's still on all those small cases, you know, there's the trust that develops one little issue at a time that we can all agree on. But I think fundamentally, people just really care about the same things, don't you think? I mean, they just want to you know, have enough money to pay the bills and have their kids be able to go to school and people to be, you know, if you get sick, you know, you don't have to sell your house. I mean, it's not asking a lot, but they're just starting to feel on both sides that every time somebody else gets elected, they're taking, it's a winner take all thing.
No, I think that's right. In my new book, I spent a lot of time in Idaho. You know, certainly a red state, very much a red state, and it was one of the few states that did not take the Medicaid expansion money from the federal government. 5 or 6 years in a row that the legislature voted against it. And Idaho is a super rural state, rural hospital system that was in trouble, you know, full of people who just didn't have a lot of money, and a lot of people who kind of fell in between the gap for, you know, Medicaid on one hand and the state exchanges on the other. And so a group begins, they're called Reclaim Idaho, and you know, it's young people, and they bought an RV and they just started driving around the state collecting signatures for a petition drive. And they did a ballot initiative, and it's not easy to do a ballot initiative in Idaho. I'm sure it's not easy to do in Alaska. Idaho is very big. Alaska, of course, also very big. But I mean, Idaho, you know, a super large and rural state in which the initiative process, you have to collect signatures in every county, and they put a lot of miles on that RV. And I think what they found was that when you go out and when you talk to neighbors and try to persuade people again and do that sort of old-fashioned politics, you know, talking to one another, that people had the same concerns, that everybody knew somebody who fell into that gap, that there were a lot of people, it didn't matter who they had voted for in the 2016 election. Perhaps they, you know, they too were struggling with trying to pay health insurance bills. We were in Idaho Falls. I was out canvassing with them at door to door, and we are walking up this driveway, and there's a pickup truck in the driveway, and there's a bumper sticker on the truck that says, "Vietnam, we were winning when I left." And I thought to myself, maybe we should go to the house next door, right? They were winning in Vietnam when this guy was there. He might not want to talk to us about healthcare. And he opens the door and he says, "Oh yeah, you know, my daughter that falls into that gap. I'm going to sign your petition. I'm going to vote for this." And it passes in Idaho in November of 2018 with something like 63% of the vote, which is extraordinary, right? I mean, something that in our national politics, it looks as if it's extraordinarily divisive. But in a state, it's just a a personal problem that when people come together and talk, it can be worked out?
I think it's, part of that, I think it's because in the national politics, it's all just theoretical, because everybody that's in Washington has like great health care. Like they're never going to get turned away from anything, or they don't worry about that. They've never had to sit up late at night and sort through the bills and call back the clinic or the state who's saying that they're only paying X amount of dollars, or they're not going to pay for this $1,500 test that you didn't even want to have, but they told you had to take. And they don't have to do that. They have staff. They live like kings and queens compared to the way regular people live. And that's one thing I don't know if a measure like this will change it, but I think it starts to say, we need to kind of dismantle this system that has created really almost an aristocracy out of the people who are leading our country, and they just don't get it. And yet when you talk to regular people who still keep voting for them, they just keep thinking, well, they must, because they tell us they're gonna, they say they're with us, and they tell us those other people are really not with us, so let's go with them. And the people I trust are, and it all goes like that. And so, I mean, I look at Alaska and I look at the way we are, and it's like you said, you talk about Vietnam vets. I write a lot of obituaries for the local paper. I've been doing it for 20 years. And, we have a high per capita of Vietnam vets, and healthcare is a huge issue. And trying to get that figured out, and the travel and the medevac in Alaska, and it can be very expensive, and it doesn't seem fair. But of course, then sometimes it's blamed on the whoever's in charge is trying to take it away. But that's not really a left-right issue when you start talking to people. And
life or death issue for a lot of people.
No, and I think, and that's also a place that I've seen where people can get together from different ideologies. We have a local group where we volunteer for a hospice care, which we don't always have a lot of people, maybe one or two a year that may decide to die at home in Haines or do, and that we help with, but mostly it's a bridge clients, helping elders stay in their homes. And, in Alaska it's hard and they might not have family, that kind of thing. But between the volunteers and the clients, there's such a mix that even somebody might read in the paper about so-and-so said something about a timber sale, and I don't like them, they're Greenie from this part of town, but then they're taking care of someone that's a very conservative, and pretty soon they're all friends, and very close friends, and are really taking care of each other. And that changes. Then the discussion changes completely, and they agree on things. And I think that's what it comes down to me. And so I like the idea of the, kids riding around in the RV. I think when one-on-one, we agree. And I think the biggest thing that happened in Haines that really mirrors the national thing is the social media, and the way that people speak to each other on social media, on Facebook. There was a closed Facebook page called Rant and Rave. I couldn't read what people were saying about me, and they pretty much, ginned up the recall and got it all going, and we had no idea what was being said about us, and you couldn't really defend it, and your friends and family couldn't peek either. But of course, people would send you a screenshot, but it'd be just so weird, because I'd go in the grocery store, and the clerk I'd seen a screenshot of the what she'd said about me, and then I say hi. She's like, "Oh, happy, how you doing today?" And I'm just like, "Do you think I didn't read it?" But people don't say that, they don't do it to your face, but there's this wall of social media that encourages bad behavior. And I wouldn't say, I don't want to be judgmental, but just, really, if you think about, is that the last thing you want people, if you drop dead tomorrow, would you like that last post to be your last quote, some horrible thing about somebody? I saw one where, and back to the party post, where somebody was talking about, the Democrats and do all these terrible things, and get rid of them all and kill them all, and really nasty stuff. And I said, well, gee, I thought we were friends. Well, we are. I said, well, what did you just said terrible things? I'm a registered Democrat. Oh, well, I don't mean you. And or media or those things. So what I wanted to ask you though is about what do you see in how this ranked choice voting, how it's going to help reduce this partisan fighting. That's what, I mean, we can all agree that this is happening, and I'm all for this because I think anything that does it. But I mean, practically, do you think it'll help?
Oh, I think it's such a difference maker. It is, to me, this is the single most important change we can make in our politics if we want to re-incentivize everybody to act differently, to campaign differently, to talk to everybody once again. I think what you're describing is a real problem in our politics. It's everybody kind of branching off into their social media silos or their partisan media silos, and we've stopped having the ability to talk to one another. And I think what ranked choice voting does is it requires our politicians to go out and talk to everybody again. You have to win with 50% of the vote ordinarily in a ranked choice voting campaign, right? So you want to make sure that if you're not somebody's first choice, that you're their second choice, which means you can't win with just a base strategy, just 25, 26% of the vote and a plurality, and having 75% of the people vote for somebody else. That doesn't work. So you can't run that kind of extreme campaign. You have to go out, have to talk to everybody. You are less likely to campaign negatively or in that scorched earth way if you also have to have a second choice. And I think it's too easy in our politics for what I saw in Idaho to happen, right? It's too easy to see a bumper sticker on somebody's truck and just move on to the next house and assume I don't have to talk to this person.
Right.
With RCV, we have to go back to trying to persuade each other to talk to one another. And when we do, I think what we learn is that we have the same concerns and the same issues. And maybe there's a way to kind of come together around all of this, and I mean, Alaska has this wonderful tradition of independent politics, of third-party politics. And the other amazing thing RCV does is it allows you to have all of that choice without having to worry that you're going to end up with the candidate that people want least. You're able to vote for the person you want the most without having to worry about a spoiler effect or a negative effect, or having to analyze all of the polls, which are always wrong, weeks out, and make a guess. Voting shouldn't be, calculus about trying to figure out who has the best chance and who has the worst chance, and how do I vote in such a way as to get some of what I want without electing the person I want the most. RCV makes it easy. 1, 2, 3, this is how I want to do it. And you end up with the candidate that the most people want, which just seems like that ought to be the point of our elections, right?
Well, I like the idea too that that the candidate then needs to try to get second and third votes too. I think that, to me, that is a little bit like what happens in local elections here. And in that, for instance, we just elected a new mayor who defeated a longtime former mayor who she was retired essentially and had all the time in the world to do things, but also then was not necessarily beholden or linked to the community in such a way. She could just stick with her base, really, for lack of a better word, in a small town. It's not quite as cut and dry as it is in bigger places, but the new person that was elected owns, his family owns a grocery store and a sporting goods store, and he grew up here. And so our family owns a lumber yard, and I said, well, I'm not sure if I always necessarily agree with all of Doug's politics for everyone. She said, oh no, he's going to be so good because he can't afford to alienate anyone in this community because his business depends on it, and his family does too. And as weird as that sounds at first, you think, well, money isn't good, but it's true. Collectively, the goodwill of the community is what floats all the merchants in town. And so someone who is actually linked that way needs to, and probably wants to, understand what their customers want, what the people in the community want, and they literally cannot afford to alienate a whole group of people by being super one way or the other. And so much of that, and I know I appreciated the title of this talk, comes into civility in civics. And it doesn't even come down to ideology or parties. It just comes down to the way that we speak to each other, and especially the way, when we disagree. Do you just dismiss people as idiots, or do you say, I hear what you're saying, but I don't agree this time, but then maybe agree on the next issue or something, show that there's some movement? I mean, how do you, when you go to big places like Michigan or Pennsylvania, do you see civility as an issue?
I think people are yearning for it again. I think we're exhausted by our partisan silos. I think we're tired of dreading Thanksgiving, right? I mean, people don't want to fight about politics with their family, and that was where the Michigan campaign to change redistricting started. There was a young woman, a young woman in her 20s, who a couple of days after the 2016 election was worried about Thanksgiving dinner in a couple of weeks. She had supporters of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton in her family, and she was thinking that there were going to be mashed potatoes and candied yams in the air. And so she goes onto Facebook and she says, I want to do something about gerrymandering in Michigan. If you agree, join me. And maybe it's a smiley face emoji at the end of the Facebook post. But this is the beginning of a group called Voters Not Politicians. And they build this nonpartisan coalition of thousands of volunteers who go out. They collect more than 420,000 signatures to get independent redistricting on Michigan's an amendment to the state constitution to change the way districts are drawn, to take it away from politicians, to give it to a commission of people. And over the course of a year and a half, they go out and convince people that they get all these signatures signed. It's the first time in Michigan history that citizens did this by themselves and not some kind of organized initiative interest going out with paid ballot canvassers and petition gatherers. And they won with 62% of the vote in Michigan, which we always know, right, is always a 50-50 closely divided state. If you're going to win with 62% in Michigan, it means you are appealing to the Democrats, to Republicans, to independents, to the folks all over the state. And it's going to make a huge difference. You are going to have citizens drawing those district lines in Michigan this year. One of the most gerrymandered states in the nation will be returned to the people. And people went out and did it, which I think is what makes it so amazingly remarkable. Now, the Alaska initiative certainly involves ranked choice voting, but it also has important pieces about dark money, about open primaries. I'm wondering how you think those might make politics better and change politics in Alaska for the good.
Well, I think the open primaries would really be helpful. We've kind of seen, we sort of have a half open primary now because the Democratic primary allows independent candidates, and currently even our two, the Democratic candidate for Congress, Elise Galvin, and the Democratic candidate for Senate, Al Gross, are actually both non-affiliated. They're independent, but they won the Democratic primary. The Republicans don't do that. So, and it's actually, this is interesting in our family because I'm a Democrat, so I'm still able to vote in all the primaries. And my husband was a longtime registered Republican, and he actually just last year changed to non-affiliated because he was getting tired of not being able to vote in the primaries for the people that he wanted to vote for. And the Republican primaries were so small. It was only that one. And he'd go, well, I went in and they weren't the people on the ballot that I wanted to vote for. And so he wanted to go over on the other side. He's not going to join another party, and then I have 4 adult children and their spouses who vote in Alaska, and all of them are unaffiliated. And they all vote, but they never joined a party. 60% of Alaskans aren't. So these primaries then determine, particularly, I think it's particularly not so much in the Haines area, but up north, who's in the legislature. And like this time, what happened was all the people who had actually seemed kind of reasonable and had crossed lines and met on both sides, they got bounced in the primary. And now the candidates that are coming in are all pretty much hardliners, and they might get elected because people vote their party. And there's obviously, Alaska's a red state, so sometimes that happens. So it kind of, we had this situation. I hadn't paid too much attention, to tell you the truth, to the state party politics, because it can be kind of depressing. And but when I was on the assembly in 2019, the governor brought in a national person, Donna Arduin, and they totally upended the state budget, and things that were important to us, for instance, like the ferry system, and there were these loans that were given out to build schools. Like in Haines, we built a new school, and they suddenly announced they weren't going to pay on the bond. In other words, they welched on the agreement. And I was on the assembly, and it was like, whoa, now we have a bill of $900,000 a year. And well, of course, there was a big outcry, and we're going to veto this. And the majority of the representatives agreed they were going to veto it, but they needed 45 to override the governor's veto. And I think it was something like 36 or 37 of them went to Juneau, and they voted like 37-1 or 36-1. But 22 stayed in Wasilla in an elementary school and refused to go down to vote. And so it didn't happen. And then towns like Haines, we get stuck having to raise taxes and try to figure out how to do this. And they cut things like, an old people benefit, where like my neighbor Mary, she's 89 and she gets like $200 a month from a state longevity kind of a older person's assistance that was cut. And I had friends that had kids in the university, and suddenly the programs were cut. My daughter was a school teacher, and it was just gone. And it was like, how did this happen? Nobody wants this. But it was all part of some bigger picture thing, we just felt very helpless. So now I think, to me, I don't think the parties are working so well in the state legislature anyway. But again, I'm not an expert on it, but I can see how the decisions that they make really, really affect those of us in smaller rural places, particularly. It's just tough. For Haines to come up with paying that debt on the school, we never would have built the school if we thought that would happen. And it just seemed, and that hurts. If you're a Republican or a Democrat, everybody's paying property tax in Haines, and it's going to have to go up to pay for that. And so those were part of the reason why I thought, this yes on 2 thing makes a lot of sense.
I think that's right. I think we have incentivized politicians to behave that way because of how uncompetitive districts are. We've moved all of the action into these closed party primaries, and you end up with just a handful of people being able to end up choosing the representatives that then everybody have to live with. And when you can open that process up, you open it up to a greater number of voices. You really small d democratize it. I think in important ways. Our politics has gotten sort of pushed to the extremes on the left and the right, and it's the way we fund campaigns, it's the way we choose candidates in party primaries, and it's the way we elect them from uncompetitive districts. And the beauty to me of Yes on 2 is that it understands each of those pieces and goes after each one of them.
The question I have for you, Dave, too, is the thing about the money. I mean, I know that the dark money, obviously, we call it dark money, and but if it's coming into your side, it's light money. If you're supporting if you're an environmental person and you want to stop something and you get big money from environmental groups across the country, or if you're a mining company and you get big money, you're in Alaska, they tend to welcome that. But I guess it's, to me, that the question comes down as to why we need the money to run. I don't know about you, but I'm getting texts daily and emails about, please give the campaign more money. And all I hear from national political campaigns and even state are that, oh my gosh, the other side got more money. We've got this deadline. If they have more money, they're gonna win. And if we get more money, we're gonna win. And I'm like, when did it all become about money? I mean, locally in Haines still, thank goodness, the big cost is some newspaper ads for maybe $200 or $300, maybe 4 of them. And we have an independent paper, so it's kind of nice to support the paper with the ads during that time. And, people will chip in for a candidate and buy an ad, but it's not thousands and thousands of dollars. But I even had a friend who ran for the legislature in Juneau, and he was told, look, it's going to cost you $30,000 to even run. And this is somebody from Haines who lives in a cabin and, has a truck that's 20 years old and great ideas and everything, but there's like no hope you can break into. How is he going to raise that among his friends? And so will this change anything, or is it just going to be more people asking for money and that's how it's going to go?
I think it absolutely could, right? I mean, all of that money, the cost of elections, it's a huge barrier to entry for normal people with good ideas who want to get involved in our politics. And what you also see, I think, and I think we all feel it, especially 3 weeks out of an election, as our email and social media feeds are bombarded with these requests, is that the two parties want you to believe that the only way you can be involved is by giving them money.
Yes.
And let me tell you, the examples from around the country from this last couple of years, and the example of what you're doing in Alaska on Yes on 2, is that you can make better elections yourselves. We have to. We are not, as citizens, limited to being donors. And the kinds of stories that have happened, the 5 states that changed redistricting in 2018, Colorado and Michigan, Missouri, Ohio, Utah, the efforts in Idaho and Nebraska and other states to expand Medicaid, the folks in Maine who went out and won ranked choice voting, people who have been who won the expanded voting rights in Florida initiative, Amendment 4 there, that gave the franchise back to 1.4 million people who had their voting rights taken away because of a felony conviction in the past that they'd already served their time for. People have gone out and they have made big change, and they have won just about every place where pro-democracy, pro-people reform is on the ballot. It is popular and it wins and it unites us. We can be more than just an ATM machine for these candidates. We can make the change we want. It is our job as citizens to go forth and make John Lewis's good trouble, right? To understand that democracy is a verb, that it's something we have to do and tend to if we want the kind of politics that we would all like to see for ourselves and our kids and future generations.
Can you, because I know you're so involved in this. I love talking to you because you know all these things that is relatively, I don't, but okay, so in these other states that have done, ranked choice, how has it gone? I mean, was it bumpy? Did it work? Do they still have Republicans and Democrats? What does it look like that's different when you go into the ballot booth, or more importantly, the results?
Yeah, I think what you have seen in the states and the cities that have done this is you end up with different kinds of campaigns. There was a campaign in Maine for governor in which you had a couple of candidates campaigning together. They actually made a TV ad together, and they said, "I want to be your number one, but we agree on this and this issue. So if I can't be your number one, I want to be your number two." And then it went to the other candidate, and she said, "We also agree on this, and I want to be your number one, but if I can't be, I want to be your number two." And all of a sudden, campaigns changed. You also had a congressional election in Maine in 2018 in which neither of the major party candidates won 50% of the vote. You had one candidate at 48, one candidate at 47, and you had two independent candidates who got the rest. So because nobody got to 50%, you ended up having the instant runoff kick in. And because of the instant runoff, the person who came in second won the majority of those other votes. So what you had really was 52% of the people who wanted a platform and position and 48 of the other. And under the old way, the candidate with 48% would have won. And all those people who voted for, a third party candidate, whether it's, a green in some states or a libertarian in other states, would have felt that their vote was wasted. They got to express the vote they wanted for the candidate that they liked the most without having to worry that it was going to elect the person that they wanted least. And I think that that's good for small parties, but it's also good for the major parties. It's good for a democracy. It's good for our conversations when people don't feel like they have to vote for, a lesser of evils. They can actually go in and express themselves. It's good for turnout. It's good for everything.
Mm-hmm. Now, in a state, though, the size of Alaska, when you're looking at, when you're eliminating dark money or money that actually might help even, ideologically linked candidates get some money when they don't have any from their friends and family or whatever it is, because just traveling around Alaska, it can cost thousands to mount a campaign, or the ads and places. Will it mean that campaigns will cost less, or will the money, it's going to have to, or will the money come from, where will it come from? Well, people will have to just spend more, where you can't actually go. A lot of parts of Alaska you can't drive to in an RV if you're
right.
You have to get a plane ticket, and it's thousands to go between villages or communities in Southeast Alaska. Even we might only be a couple 100 miles apart, but it's boats and planes and jets and staying on people's floors and stuff. It's and time away from your job or your family.
Yeah, there's no indication that ranked choice voting costs any more for campaigns. I think in some elections, folks have actually found it cost less, because all of a sudden you are not seeing all of these negative ads everybody hates so much. I think a big portion of the cost of campaigns, right, is all the negative ads that have to be broadcast on TV and on social media all the time. And if you are campaigning differently, all of a sudden the entire cost structure changes, your incentives change, our dialogue changes, and that, I think, is what's so exciting about it all.
Well, one of the benefits, I think, of the whole COVID and the pandemic has been, just what we're doing now. I probably never talk to you, to whoever, but those of you that are here, it's like, it wouldn't happen. But it's also, even locally in Haines, the meetings are now, on Zoom or speakerphone. And so people who are busy, they got little kids at home, or they've got an elder that's there, that's bad weather, they're calling in and going to these meetings like never before. And I see that happening in Alaska politics too, because with this new format, people can go all over the state without actually buying a ticket. and groups can come in and ask questions, and it can be very interactive and wide open, whether it's at a A and B hall. And Southeast or a Legion Hall in Wasilla, whatever, they can have candidate forums with senators, and everybody can be on the same screen chatting in their questions. And I did want to ask Alex about that. I don't know if you have questions, if there's people there that want to ask questions, especially probably of Dave, if we should do that now.
Yes, absolutely. I just have to say, I am so enjoying this conversation. This has been wonderful. So, and I know we've got a ton of questions and comments in the chat box. So I will try and go through and pick the ones that, pick out some themes. But before I do that, I do just want to give a quick overview of Ballot Measure 2 for those who are joining us on Zoom or on Facebook, if you're not familiar with the reforms that Ballot Measure 2 contains. So all of this talk about party control and power and who holds the power in elections and in politics, that's really what we're driving at with Ballot Measure 2. Ballot Measure 2 is about putting the power back into the hands of the voters. And so these common sense reforms can make a big difference in allowing voters, not political parties and special interests and insiders, to decide Alaska's future. So Ballot Measure 2 would make 3 small changes to how we elect our leaders. And that can have a big impact on the governance that we get in return, right? So the 3 changes of Ballot Measure 2. 1 is an open primary system, open to all voters, regardless of party affiliation. And Heather, you touched a little bit on that, on the challenges that we see with our closed primary system currently. It also strengthens disclosure requirements. So if you want to spend money in Alaska to influence our elections, and we believe that should be transparent about who you are and where that money comes from. And so large donations to candidate campaigns ensure voters know, who's trying to influence their elections. So anything over $2,000 would require disclosure within 24 hours of that donation. So no more of this kind of independent expenditure groups where you can donate to them and then they can donate to a political campaign and we don't know what the true source of that spending is, right? So while we can't take away the ability to contribute large sums of money because of Citizens United, we can at least require more disclosure and more transparency about that. And so the third reform of Ballot Measure 2 is ranked choice voting, which empowers voters to rank their candidates in order of preference. And David, you spoke a little bit about that. And in Ballot Measure 2, that would happen in the general election. So in the primary, we would have an open primary system. The top 4 vote getters of that primary election then move on to the general. And then in the general, you've got a ranked choice system where you can rank up to 4 candidates. Right, and it's a little different than how ranked choice voting has been implemented in other places. Our reforms do not require that you rank all of the candidates. You can rank 1 if you really only feel strongly about one person, the same way that you've always voted. You can do that, and your vote will still count. If you would like to rank all 4 candidates, that's perfectly fine. And so the aim of Ballot Measure 2 is really to make elections more transparent, to increase participation, both of the elected officials. To your points, David, about folks having to campaign to a broader base. You can no longer run on single issue campaigns, right? You have to reach a larger group of people. And it also increases participation and turnout among the voters. When you feel excited, when you feel motivated, when you feel like your vote counts, you're gonna show up. And so that's what we're really trying to do here with Ballot Measure 2. So I do just want to reference, there's a comment in the chat box from Delicia for you, David, about voter turnout and accountability. She says a big issue in Alaska is that politicians can focus on campaigning to their base and aligning with the national party agenda and less on local issues, which I think we've talked about pretty extensively in Alaska. We have the highest percentage of undeclared and non-affiliated voters in the country. And so people don't really care so much for party politics. What they care about are Alaskan issues. And so how does a system like ranked choice voting ensure more accountability? And how does it impact turnout?
Yeah, I think it can be transformative. I'm here in Massachusetts where I think we have some similar problems. And this is such an overwhelmingly Democratic state that if you win the Democratic primary, you can pretty much coast on into Congress. And we have had the last 2 years, there's been an open seat in Congress because somebody's retired or moved on. And the winner of that race has won with 21% both times. Because there were 8 or 9 candidates in the race, and so people got all of that choice, right? But then they ended up with a candidate that 79% of the people didn't want. Mm-hmm. And you don't have good polls in, like, you know, a random Massachusetts congressional district, so you have no way of knowing who's in first, who's in second, who's in third, and who has no chance. And I think the beauty of a ranked choice system is that everybody gets to run. You get to hear from everybody. Everybody is going to come talk to you because they want to be your first or second or third choice. Mm-hmm. And when you put those in order, you get this extra power. It gives your ballot more punch. I mean, you know, think back to the Republican presidential primary in 2016 with 17 candidates, or the Democratic campaign this last year with, you know, 24. We end up with splintered politics and winners that just don't represent everybody. So I think the beauty of this is everybody gets to get heard, but then the winner is always someone who has the widest and the deepest support amongst the most people, and that can just do so much to make people feel like they're being heard, that they're being represented, and that they have, you know, real choice in the matter.
Absolutely. Thank you. And we've got a question here from John about how the ranking works. So I'll do a quick explanation of ranked choice voting under ballot measure 2. And David, if you would like to jump in afterwards and give any other insight. But essentially, with a plurality system, you can win first past the post. If you've got 30% of the vote, right, you are the winner. With ranked choice voting, it requires that you have a majority of support. And so you have to get to that 51%. So when folks rank their candidates, the candidate with the least number of, after the first round of counting happens, the candidate with the least number of first round votes is dropped, and those voters, their second choice candidates are then counted. And so we've got a explanation of this on our website, and I am a visual learner, so hearing someone talk is difficult for me to get this concept, but we've got some great videos. We also have some great explanations on our website. I will put them in the chat box here. So feel free to check those out, and always, you know, feel free to reach out to us if you'd like more information. I know we're coming up on 5 minutes left. Unfortunately, I wish we didn't have to end this. So won't be able to dive too deeply into that, but
think of it as an instant runoff. Where if you have 3 candidates, and the candidate and no one gets to 50%, the candidate who comes in third is dropped. And instead of everybody having to come back to the polls, right, to get on a ferry, to get on a plane, to come back to the polls 4 weeks later, and turnout always drops in a runoff. This way here, you have the runoff right away. If you want to vote for one person, that vote stays through as long as that candidate is in there, so you don't have to worry about that. But if you want to rank, you get that power of knowing that if your candidate comes in third, you still also have a say in the runoff.
Great, thank you. I'm going to do just one last call for any questions in the chat box. If you're joining us on Facebook, feel free to make a comment, and we will get it over here in our Zoom chat for Heather or for David. But I do just want to let everyone know, if you're joining us on Zoom, we had this promo running where the first 20 folks to join us on Zoom are going to receive free copies of Heather and David's books. And it looks like everyone is going to get a copy. So super excited about that. keep an eye out. You'll be probably getting an email from me confirming some information from you. And thank you so much for joining today. It doesn't look like we've got any other questions. So I just want to say thank you so much to you both, Heather and David, for joining. This was a fantastic conversation, and I think really motivated all of us who are listening. And I personally feel so fired up to get out there and talk with people. And if you are similarly fired up about Ballot Measure 2, please reach out to us. We would love to get involved with you. Whatever you're doing in your community, bring us there. We really need to be, at this point, we're 3 weeks out from the election. Encourage your friends and family to vote. Tell them more about Ballot Measure 2. Reach out to us if you need more information. We've got yard signs. We've got literature. We've got tons of events happening through the election. So we are ready to go, and just appreciate all of you for your time and for this conversation today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having us. Nice to meet you, David, Alex.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
You too.